I don't tell this story often, not because I'm afraid people won't believe me, but because I'm afraid they will. This happened to me 3 years ago, in the fall of 2022. I had just moved back to my hometown in northern Pennsylvania after living in Pittsburgh for nearly a decade. City life had worn me down. The noise, the stress, the constant motion. I needed a reset. So I rented a small cabin deep in the woods about 20 minutes outside of a town called Bradford. The cabin belonged to a friend of my uncle's, and he let me rent it cheap under the condition I kept an eye on the property. It was old but cozy. No neighbors for miles, thick woods on all sides, and a gravel road that twisted so far into the trees that GPS lost signal halfway down it. It was exactly what I needed: quiet, isolated, and peaceful. Or at least it started that way. The first week was perfect. I worked remotely, hiked during lunch, and spent my evenings reading by the fireplace or watching the stars from the back porch. No light pollution, no traffic, just the occasional rustle in the trees from deer or raccoons. One night, maybe my 4th or 5th night there, I was sitting outside around 11 p.m., sipping hot tea and wrapped in a flannel blanket. It was cold, but not uncomfortably so, and the sky was perfectly clear. I remember thinking, this is the first time in years I've felt fully at peace. I stayed out there longer than usual until the air turned sharp and damp and the fire pit died out. Just before going inside, I thought I heard something from the woods, like a soft crunch of leaves. But I chalked it up to a deer or maybe the wind and went inside. Locked the door, turned off the porch light, and went to bed. The next night, the motion sensor on the porch light kept turning on. At first, I figured it was bugs or wind or maybe even a raccoon, but it kept happening, 5, maybe 6 times in a row, every 10 minutes or so. I finally got up, peeked through the blinds, and saw nothing. Just empty woods, unmoving trees, and the soft yellow glow from the bulb above the porch. I started to feel a little on edge, but again, I convinced myself it was nothing. Rural life takes adjustment, I told myself. You're used to sirens and headlights, not creaking branches and night animals. I turned off the light manually and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, thinking I heard faint knocking sounds from the side of the cabin. That weekend, I decided to do some yard work and check the perimeter. There wasn't much to maintain, but I figured it might help me sleep better knowing the area was clear. While walking along the edge of the woods behind the cabin, I found something strange. There were boot prints in the dirt. They weren't mine. I always wore trail runners. These were heavier, wider, like someone wearing work boots had been walking just a few feet from my back window. They led in from the trees, curved around the cabin once, and disappeared back into the woods. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the pattern, trying to convince myself they were old. Maybe the guy who checked on the property before me. Maybe a hunter. But the earth was damp from rain the day before, and the prints were clean, crisp, like they'd been made in the last 24 hours. That night, I double-checked every lock, closed all the blinds, even pulled a chair in front of the front door. At around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound I still can't describe clearly. It wasn't a bang or a knock. It was a dragging sound, like someone was slowly pulling something heavy across the porch. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped. Then, a single, deliberate knock. Not fast, not frantic, just one slow knock. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and grabbed the small flashlight I kept by the nightstand. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there staring at the bedroom door, hoping, praying, I imagined it. Another knock, this one louder. I didn't go to the door. I couldn't. I just stayed in bed and waited. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion or fear, because the next thing I remember was waking up to sunlight pouring through the window. The next morning, I found a dead squirrel on the porch. Its neck looked twisted, not broken, not chewed, twisted, almost surgically. It was laid right in the center of the welcome mat, like someone had placed it there deliberately. I took a long stick and flung it into the woods, then checked the entire cabin for signs of forced entry. Nothing. But that feeling of peace I'd had when I moved in was completely gone. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, blinds shut, clutching a kitchen knife like that was going to do anything. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not on the porch this time, but in the gravel outside. Slow, steady, one after another, crunching the rocks like whoever it was didn't care if they were heard. They stopped right in front of the window behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just sat there frozen, listening. Then came a tapping sound. Not knocking, tapping, like a single finger against the glass. I wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but I just sat there, paralyzed. After a few minutes, the tapping stopped. I heard footsteps again, slowly fading into the trees. I finally built up the courage to peek through the blinds, but the yard was empty. Just the porch light flickering faintly and the soft glow of the moon. No footprints, no broken glass, nothing. The next day, I packed my bags. I didn't even call the guy I was renting from. I just left the key under the mat and drove until I hit the highway. A week later, I went back with my uncle during the day to grab the rest of my things. Everything was how I left it. Except for one thing. There was a message scrawled into the wood of the front door. Not spray paint, not marker, scratched in, like with a knife. 4 words. Why didn't you answer? We didn't report it. My uncle said it was probably just some drifter, someone messing around. But I know better. I know someone was out there, watching, waiting. And I think, if I had opened that door just once, I wouldn't be here to tell you this. So if you ever find yourself in the woods, far from other people, and you hear a knock at the door in the middle of the night, don't answer it. Ever. I used to live in a small town in Vermont, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest news is when a new diner opens or when the leaves start to turn. My house was a rental, a little 1-story cottage at the edge of town, surrounded by trees, with only one other house nearby, which sat empty most of the year. This happened in October, about 3 years ago, when I was 27. I had just gone through a messy breakup and decided to move out of the city to get some space and reset. That cottage seemed perfect. Quiet, cheap, private, or at least it felt that way at first. I spent the first couple of weeks settling in. The mornings were peaceful, filled with the sounds of birds and leaves rustling. Evenings, I'd sit on the front porch with a cup of tea and watch the sun dip behind the trees. No traffic, no loud neighbors, just the occasional fox or deer wandering through the yard. It was exactly the kind of quiet I thought I needed. I worked remotely as a graphic designer, so I was home most of the time. Sometimes I wouldn't leave the house for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. I liked it that way. Just me, the forest, and silence. That silence didn't last. The first time I noticed something odd was a Thursday night. It was around 10:30 p.m. I'd just shut off the TV and was heading to bed when I heard a faint tapping sound. It wasn't rhythmic, more like 2 knocks, pause, then 1 knock, pause, then nothing. I paused in the hallway, listening. At first, I thought maybe it was a branch hitting the side of the house. It was breezy out, and the cottage was surrounded by trees, but it sounded too deliberate. I crept to the front door and flipped on the porch light. Nothing, just the empty yard and the gravel driveway. I opened the door and leaned out slightly. Still nothing. No wind, no animals. It was dead quiet. I chalked it up to nerves and went to bed. The next night, it happened again. This time I was brushing my teeth when I heard the same sequence. 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock. Only this time, it was louder, closer. I froze, toothbrush in hand, trying to pinpoint where it came from. I moved to the living room and listened. It came again. 2 knocks, then 1. From the back door. The back of the house faced the forest. There wasn't a porch light back there, just a small floodlight that I rarely used. My stomach twisted as I walked to the kitchen and flipped the light switch. The backyard lit up in pale yellow light, revealing nothing but leaves and trees swaying slightly. I unlocked the back door and opened it a crack, just enough to stick my head out. Nothing. But the smell of damp leaves was overwhelming, like something had been disturbed. And for the first time, I noticed something new. A faint footprint in the patch of mud just beyond the door. Not a boot print. Barefoot. I shut and locked the door. For the next few days, nothing happened. I tried to move on, telling myself it was probably an animal or some kid playing a prank. But then Monday night rolled around. I was in bed, reading, when I heard it again. 2 knocks. 1 knock. But this time, it wasn't on the door. It was on the window, my bedroom window. I bolted upright. The window was behind me, just a few feet from the head of the bed. I turned slowly, heart pounding, and saw the curtains sway slightly, like they'd been touched. I couldn't see outside. The porch light didn't reach that far, and I didn't have motion sensors installed. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I went outside and walked the perimeter of the house. Near the bedroom window, the grass was pressed down in a narrow trail leading into the woods, like someone had been pacing there. I followed it for maybe 10 or 15 feet before it just disappeared. No footprints, no signs of where it went. That evening, I installed motion lights on every corner of the house. Cheap ones from the hardware store, battery-powered. I also bought a little wireless camera for the front door and set it up to alert my phone if it detected movement. That night I sat up in bed, staring at my phone screen, waiting. At 2:08 a.m., I got the alert. Motion detected. I opened the camera app immediately. There was nothing there. Just an empty porch, swaying trees, and a faint glow from the floodlight. Then, barely visible, a shape stepped into the frame. It was a person. They were standing just off the porch, right at the edge of the camera's range, tall, skinny, and still. No movement. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark figure standing. And then, they raised their hand. 2 knocks on the porch railing. Pause. 1 knock. Then they backed away and vanished into the dark. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Say what, that someone knocked on my railing? I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I sent the camera footage to my friend Nate. He was a sheriff's deputy in a nearby county. His reply came a few hours later. That's creepy as hell. No car in the driveway, no tracks in the yard. You sure it's not a prank? I wasn't sure, but I didn't think it was a prank. Whoever this was, they weren't trying to break in. They were just letting me know they were there, watching, waiting. The knocking came every night that week. Always the same pattern. Always around the same time. 2 or 3 in the morning. Sometimes it was the front porch, sometimes the back door. Once I heard it on the side of the house, right next to my bedroom wall. Each time I checked, I'd see nothing. No one, but always something small left behind. A single footprint, a smudge on the glass, a faint hand-shaped smear on the siding. I started keeping all the lights on. I even brought a baseball bat to bed. But the knocking never stopped. By the 2nd week, it was affecting me during the day. I couldn't focus. I was jumpy. My hands shook constantly. I started having nightmares, dreams of standing at the window, frozen, while something just outside the glass whispered my name. I didn't tell many people. What was I supposed to say? Someone keeps knocking on my house but never tries to get in. Eventually, I snapped. That Friday night, just after 2 a.m., I heard it again. 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock. This time at the back door. I grabbed the bat and yanked the door open, floodlight blazing. There was no one there. Just trees. But something was different. There was a smell, like wet wood and old dirt, and an odd silence. The bugs had stopped chirping. The wind had died. Everything was still. I stepped outside. My breath caught in my throat. Lined up along the back fence facing the house were small stones, 12 of them, perfectly spaced, Each one had a dark, smudged mark on it, like ash or charcoal. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know. I backed into the house and locked every door and window. I stayed up until dawn. I called Nate again the next day. He came out, looked around, took a few photos, but there were no footprints, no signs of forced entry, just the stones. He collected one, said he'd look into it. He never found anything. That night there were no knocks, but I swear I heard breathing outside the bedroom window. Not loud, just steady. Inhale, exhale, for almost an hour. The next night, I left. I packed a bag and drove 2 towns over to stay with a cousin. I didn't tell them everything, just that I was dealing with some weird stuff and needed a break. I stayed there for 4 days, no knocks, no alerts, no breathing. When I finally went back to the cottage, I felt like maybe it was over. I was wrong. The house smelled wrong, like mildew and rust, like something had been sitting inside, waiting. I walked through the room slowly, bat in hand. Everything looked the same, nothing missing, nothing moved. But then I reached the bedroom. My bed was turned. Not just messed up, physically turned at an angle facing the window. And written on the glass in small, greasy fingerprints were the words, "You left." I moved out that night, packed everything I could fit into my car and drove straight to Nate's. We filed a report. I never heard back. I broke the lease, lost my deposit, and moved into a small apartment in Burlington. I haven't had any issues since. But sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I think I hear it, 2 soft knocks, a pause, then one more. And I keep wondering, what if it wasn't the house? What if it's still out there, waiting for me to come back? I want to start by saying this happened just last year, and I still don't have a satisfying explanation for it. I was living alone at the time, in a small rental cabin outside a tiny town in northern Idaho. I'd just gone through a breakup and needed space, somewhere to clear my head. The place was remote, surrounded by thick pine forest, with no neighbors in sight. Perfect for healing, or at least that's what I thought. It was one of those off-the-grid Airbnbs with solar panels and a wood stove. No Wi-Fi, no cell reception. Just a landline for emergencies and a shelf full of old paperbacks. I was only supposed to stay 2 weeks. I left after 9 days. The first few days were peaceful. I'd wake up early, make coffee on the wood-burning stove, and sit out on the little porch while the morning fog rolled through the trees. I spent hours reading, writing in a journal, or going for hikes on the nearby trails. The silence out there wasn't just quiet. It felt heavy, like sound had been drained from the air. I didn't realize how deeply that silence would get under my skin. Everything changed on the 5th night. It started with a knock, not a loud bang, just a soft, rhythmic knock at the door. I had just climbed into bed around 11:30 and was reading by lantern light. When I heard it, I sat up immediately. My first thought was, no one should be out here. I stayed frozen for a moment, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Then I heard it again. 3 soft knocks. Tap, tap, tap. The door was locked. I crept out of bed and tiptoed to the small kitchen window beside the front door. I peeked through the curtain, expecting to see a ranger maybe, or someone who got lost on a trail. But there was no one there. The porch was empty, just the moonlight and the shadows of the trees. I waited a few minutes, listening. Nothing. I chalked it up to wind, or maybe a branch hitting the door, and eventually got back into bed. But I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I went outside to check. There were no fallen branches, no signs of anything hitting the door. But something weird caught my eye. 2 small, faint smudges near the bottom of the door, like fingerprints, but lower than where an adult's hands would normally be. It was subtle, and they could have been from me bringing in firewood earlier in the week. Still, I cleaned the door and tried not to think about it. That night, I double-checked every window lock and bolted the front door. I even pushed the little love seat in front of it, just for peace of mind. At around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No sound, No obvious reason. Just something pulled me from sleep. The room felt colder than usual. The fire in the stove had burned down to glowing embers. I sat up in bed, listening. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Not at the door this time, at the window. I turned my head slowly toward the window across the room. The curtain was drawn, but I swear I saw the shadow of movement behind it. Just the faintest shifting of light, like someone was standing on the other side. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The tapping stopped. I stayed in bed until the sun came up. On the 7th day, I called the owner of the cabin from the emergency landline. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but I explained what I heard, twice. He sounded surprised, but not exactly concerned. "Probably just a raccoon," he said. "They'll knock things around looking for food." I asked if he had any trail cams or anything around the property. He said no. "Too far out here for anyone to bother," he added. I hung up, unsatisfied. That night, I decided to keep the lantern on beside my bed. I also brought a heavy fireplace poker with me, just in case. It was the 8th night that really broke me. I was already in bed, poker resting against the wall, lantern glowing beside me. I kept my ears open, my eyes wide. I don't think I even blinked for several minutes straight. Then footsteps, not on the porch, above me, on the roof. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I stared at the ceiling, heart racing so hard I could feel the blood in my teeth. The roof wasn't easily accessible. There was no ladder, and the edges sloped steeply. The idea that someone had climbed up there in the middle of the night. I didn't know what to do. I was too afraid to go outside, too afraid to move. The footsteps moved toward the far side of the roof, above the window. Then, silence. No tap this time. Just the quiet, waiting kind of silence that feels like something is watching you. I sat up and reached for the poker. That's when I saw it. The curtain across the room was no longer closed. It was slightly parted, just an inch. I hadn't touched it. I was sure of that. Something had moved it. I stayed awake until dawn, clutching that poker with white knuckles, staring at that thin line of moonlight spilling through the parted curtain. I was too afraid to check. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to go outside and look. There were footprints in the dirt below the window, small, barefoot, almost childlike, but off. The toes were too long, and the heel was wrong, narrow, as if whoever made them didn't walk quite like a person. I took a photo with my old digital camera and packed my bags immediately. I didn't even call the owner. I just left. But here's the part I've never told anyone. I didn't drive straight home. I stopped at a diner 2 towns over to grab coffee and try to calm down. I took out the camera to show the photo to the waitress, just to get a second opinion. Maybe I was imagining it. But the photo was gone. Not blurry, not deleted, just gone, like it had never been taken. I moved back into my apartment in the city, and I haven't been back to that part of Idaho since. I didn't write a review for the cabin. I didn't tell anyone I'd left early. What would I even say? But sometimes, especially when I'm up late or when the power flickers, I think about that sound. Tap, 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 and the footsteps above me, and the curtain that had been moved. Sometimes, late at night, I'll swear I hear it again, not from the door, not from the window, but from the ceiling. Final thought, I keep telling myself it was just an animal. Maybe a prank, maybe stress. But in the back of my mind, I know what I felt. I know what I heard. And I know someone or something was outside that cabin, waiting, watching, and it wasn't alone. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan, tucked between dense pine forests and lakes that always seemed a little too still. Everyone knew each other, and most folks never even locked their doors, until recently, that is. This story happened about 3 years ago, just after I moved back home to take care of my dad's place after he passed. The house sat on the edge of town, near the tree line, with only one neighbor in visible distance, and even they were a good half-mile down the road. I've told this story maybe 3 times in total, mostly because it sounds unbelievable, even to me. But I swear to you, it happened. Or something happened. And to this day, I haven't slept soundly since. It started on a Monday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. I'd been working from home for a few weeks at that point, adjusting to rural life after years of city noise and apartment walls. That night, I made a simple dinner, watched an old detective show, and got into bed around 10. It was quiet, like uncomfortably quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. I remember thinking it felt like the woods were holding their breath. Then, at exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up to a faint noise, a soft tap, tap, tap. It wasn't loud, more like the sound of a fingernail against glass. I froze in bed, unsure if I had dreamt it. I stayed still for what felt like forever, listening. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Clearer this time, like it was coming from the living room window. I got up, turned on the hallway light, and peered out from behind the curtain. There was no one there. I chalked it up to the wind, or maybe an old branch against the house. I went back to bed, feeling a little silly for being on edge. The next night, it happened again. Same time, 2:14 a.m., tap, 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 this time at the kitchen window. I crept out of bed and slowly tiptoed across the cold floor. I didn't turn on the lights this time. I just peeked out the window. Again, no one. But something was different. The motion light outside had flicked on. It only did that if something moved across the driveway. The sensor wasn't that sensitive either. You had to walk right into its path. Still, no sign of anyone. No car, no footprints, nothing. That's when I started to feel it, the unease. Like something was just a second ahead of me, always staying out of sight. By the third night, I was anxious. I stayed up late with the lights on, trying to focus on a book, but couldn't stop glancing at the windows. And then, like clockwork, 2:14 a.m. This time it wasn't tapping. It was a low, steady scraping. Not at a window, but at the back door. The sound was long and drawn out, like someone dragging something sharp across the wood. I couldn't bring myself to check. I just sat in the hallway, staring down toward the back entrance, phone in hand, heart pounding. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone might be outside, maybe. After 10 agonizing minutes, the noise stopped. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I walked around the house in daylight, hoping I'd find some explanation. A branch, a raccoon, anything. But what I found made my skin crawl. There were 5 long scratches on the back door. Parallel. About 4 feet up from the ground. Too high for an animal. Too perfect to be random. They looked like fingernail marks. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to believe that someone was, in fact, outside. That night, I barricaded the doors. I pushed a chair under the front knob and propped a metal rod against the back one. I even stuck bells on the windows like some kind of paranoid Home Alone setup. But it didn't help. Because that night, the tapping returned. Except now, it was on every window. Tap, 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 left side of the house, then the back, then the front, like someone was circling, or multiple people. I stood frozen in the hallway, my body screaming to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. I just listened, heart pounding in my ears, and then came the voice. Faint, like it was right outside the living room window. Let me in. Not a whisper, not a scream, just calm, almost polite. I didn't look, I didn't speak. I just backed into the closet and sat in the dark until the sun came up. After that, I started staying at a friend's place across town during the nights. I'd come back during the day to check the house, feed the cat, and grab clothes. Every time I returned, I noticed small things were off. A glass I hadn't used was in the sink. The back porch light, one I never turned on, would be lit. Once I found the living room curtains closed. I always left them open. The worst was the Wednesday I came back to find the TV on. Static. Just static. I don't even have cable. I finally installed cameras, one by the front porch, one above the back door, and a third in the hallway inside. I figured if I was being paranoid, fine, but I needed proof. That night, I stayed at my friend Nate's place again. We played video games until about midnight, then crashed in the spare room. At 2:14 a.m., I got a notification. Motion detected, back door. My blood went cold. I opened the app. The back porch feed was nothing but darkness. Until a figure slowly stepped into view. A man, tall, thin, wearing a long coat, no visible face, just darkness where the features should be. He stared into the camera for a full 45 seconds, then raised one hand and waved. Not fast, not slow, just a casual, gentle wave. Then he stepped backward, still facing the lens, until he disappeared into the dark. The clip ended. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I went to the police, showed them the footage, asked if they could patrol the area or maybe dust for prints. The officer looked sympathetic but shrugged. No crime's been committed, no break-in. We'll keep an eye out, but it could be someone messing with you. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stopped staying at Nate's. I figured if this person wanted me, I was safer facing it than running from it. That night, I stayed home, with the lights off, with my phone camera recording propped in the window, just in case. At 2:14 a.m., the motion light clicked on. I stood perfectly still in the hallway, bat in hand. Tap, 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 the living room window. Then a voice, low, but clearer this time. Why are you watching me? My phone vibrated, a new notification. Motion detected, inside hallway. I stared at the message, paralyzed. I slowly turned toward the hallway cam. The live feed showed me, but standing behind me, just barely visible in the corner of the frame, was a second figure, tall, thin, coat, no face, waving. I spun around. Nothing was there, just empty hallway, no sound, no movement, no sign of entry. But when I looked back at the camera feed, the image was frozen on that last frame. The man still there, still waving. I moved out the next day, left everything behind, sold the house within a month. Didn't mention the specifics, just said I needed to relocate quickly for work. I've lived in a third-floor apartment ever since. No trees, no yard, no windows that face the woods. But sometimes at night, I still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And once, just once, I got a package at the door. No return address. Just a flash drive inside. I plugged it in. It was a single video file, grainy, static-filled footage. Me, standing in my new hallway, and behind me, that same faceless man, waving. This story was shared with me by my cousin Claire. It happened a few years ago, and she swears to this day that every word is true. I've changed names and some details to protect her privacy, but the rest is exactly as she told it. It's stuck with me ever since, and if you listen through to the end, you'll see why. I grew up in a small mountain town in northern Idaho. It's the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, kids ride bikes until sunset, and everyone knows your name at the grocery store. My cousin Claire used to babysit for families in the area during high school, and one of her regular jobs was watching a little boy named Max. He was 6 at the time. His family lived up a dirt road about 15 minutes outside town, a big house with a wraparound porch surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides. It wasn't isolated exactly, but the nearest neighbor was still a good walk away. The house itself had this weird, old-world charm, lots of wood paneling, heavy doors, and floorboards that creaked no matter how gently you walked. It always smelled faintly of cedar and something else. Something old, like a basement that had never fully dried. Claire never liked being out there after dark, but she needed the money, and the parents always paid her extra when they were gone overnight. Which is exactly what happened one weekend in late October. Max's parents were heading to Spokane for a wedding. They asked Claire to stay from Friday afternoon through Sunday morning. She packed a bag, brought her school books, and figured she'd spend most of the time watching movies with Max and doing homework after he went to bed. Friday went exactly as expected. They had spaghetti for dinner, played a few rounds of Candyland, and watched The Iron Giant before Max got sleepy. He was in bed by 9 o'clock, lights out by 9:15. By 10 o'clock, Claire was in the den downstairs, curled up on the couch with her laptop and a cup of tea. The house was quiet except for the occasional ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the wind brushing tree branches against the windows. At around 11:30, she heard the first knock. It wasn't loud, more like a gentle tap, tap, tap on the front door. Claire paused her movie and listened. It happened again. Tap, tap, tap. She glanced at the window, then at her phone. No messages, no calls, no motion lights had gone off outside. She stood up and approached the door slowly. There was a curtain over the window next to it, and she tugged it back just enough to peek through. Nothing. Just the porch. Empty. She waited a few seconds, then turned the deadbolt just in case. As she stepped back, another knock echoed from the back door, this time slightly louder. 3 knocks, steady, deliberate. Claire felt her stomach flip. There's no reason anyone would be knocking at the back of the house, especially this late, and especially out here. She didn't go to the back door. Instead, she grabbed the cordless phone and dialed Max's mom. No answer. She called the dad's number. Also nothing. Then silence again. Claire turned off all the lights downstairs and went to check on Max. He was fast asleep, curled up with a stuffed dinosaur, the nightlight glowing softly beside his bed. She sat on the floor next to him, trying to convince herself she was overreacting. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was an animal. Old houses made noises, didn't they? Then the power went out. Just like that. Every light, every hum, every sound. Gone. Claire's heart stopped. She stood there in the darkness, waiting for it to come back on, praying it was just a flicker. But it didn't. After a full minute, she took out her phone to use as a flashlight. The battery was at 12%. She didn't want to scare Max, so she stayed in his room, listening. The house had changed. Without power, it felt wrong, bigger somehow, hollow. And then came the footsteps, soft, slow, crunching footsteps outside the window. She turned toward the noise. Max's window faced the woods. There was a motion sensor light out back, but with the power out, it stayed off. Still, Claire stared into the darkness beyond the glass, trying to see. She thought maybe she caught a glimpse of something moving. A shape, a shadow, and then it was gone. She didn't sleep. Claire stayed awake the entire night, sitting in the hallway between Max's room and the staircase. She clutched a heavy flashlight she'd found in the kitchen drawer and waited, barely breathing. At one point, she heard the front doorknob jiggle, not loudly, not violently, just once, like someone was testing it. She held her breath and didn't move. By morning, the power was still out. The parents were supposed to be back by 10 o'clock, but they didn't show. At 10:30, Claire got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. It was a picture of the house, taken from the woods. She could see the back of the house, the deck, Max's bedroom window. In the lower corner, barely visible, was a silhouette. Someone crouching behind a tree. Claire's fingers went numb. She turned off her phone and grabbed Max, still in his pajamas, and marched out to her car. She didn't stop to grab her bag or even lock the door behind her. She just drove. Back to town, back to people, back to safety. She didn't tell Max anything, just said they were going to surprise his parents. They were both home when she arrived. Confused, but home. The wedding had ended late, and they'd decided to leave early in the morning instead of driving through the night. Claire didn't mention the photo at first, or the knocking, or the footsteps. But a few hours later, when she finally calmed down enough to speak clearly, she showed them the picture. Max's dad turned white. He left the room without saying a word. The mom just kept shaking her head and repeating, "No, no, no." Claire asked what was wrong. The mom finally answered, "There's no cell service out there, not for miles. Whoever sent that picture, they had to be nearby." That was 3 years ago. They never figured out who sent the photo. It wasn't saved on Claire's phone when she tried to show the police. Just gone, like it was never there. The house went up for sale the following spring. Claire never babysat again, and to this day, she swears that if she had opened that door just once, she wouldn't be here to tell the story. Sometimes she still gets texts from unknown numbers, random photos of trees, dirt roads, empty porches. and once, one showed her own apartment door. She moved the next day. I live in a small town in northern Michigan, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names and nothing really ever happens. We've got one gas station, one diner, a bait shop, and too many deer for our own good. I work remotely, so I don't leave home much, especially in the winter. It gets brutally cold out here. The kind of cold that shuts your lungs down for a second when you step outside. I've always found the isolation peaceful, quiet, predictable, until last December. I swear to you, this story is real. I haven't told anyone about it. Not in full. I'm only sharing it now because I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else out there has experienced something similar, because something, or someone, was outside my house that week, and I still don't understand what it wanted. It started on a Tuesday, December 12th. I remember because I had just wrapped up a Zoom call with my boss and went to take the trash out before the sun went down. We only get about 6 hours of daylight in the winter, so it was already getting dim by 4:30. I stepped out into the snow with the garbage bag in one hand and my hoodie sleeves pulled over the other. It was quiet, except for the usual creak of the trees and a few distant crows. The woods behind my house stretch out for miles. I've hiked them plenty of times. But that evening, something felt off. Not like something was watching me exactly, just a weird stillness, like the woods were holding their breath. I shook it off and tossed the bag into the bin. Just before I went back inside, I looked out toward the tree line. I don't know why. I wasn't expecting to see anything. But there was a shape there, a figure, too far to make out details, maybe 50 feet from the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by trees. At first, I thought it was a hunter. People wander through the woods up here all the time, but it was the way the figure was just standing still, like it wasn't moving at all. No shifting weight, no signs of walking or fidgeting, just perfectly still. I blinked and it was gone. I chalked it up to low light and snow glare. I've had my eyes play tricks on me before, but something about that brief glimpse stuck with me for the rest of the night. Around 2 a.m., I was woken up by my motion sensor light clicking on outside. That in itself isn't strange. The light picks up deer, raccoons, even blowing snow sometimes. But what was strange was the sound I heard immediately after. 3 soft taps on the back window, the one that faces the woods. Not loud, not hurried, just tap, tap, tap. I froze in bed, heart suddenly thudding in my ears. I live alone, no roommates, no pets, and the nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile down the road. I stayed perfectly still for a long time, straining to hear anything else. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to slide out of bed and peek through the curtains. Nothing. Just snow and the soft yellow glow of the motion light. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I told myself it was nothing. Probably an icicle or branch tapping the window. I even went out to check, and sure enough, there was a low-hanging pine branch close enough to touch the glass if the wind blew right. But the wind hadn't been blowing. That evening, I turned in early, kept all the lights off except for a small lamp by the couch, and tried to lose myself in a show. I was halfway through an episode when the motion light came on again. I looked out the side window this time, nothing there. But the light stayed on. I got up and went to the kitchen, which has a view of the backyard. And that's when I saw it. Someone was standing just beyond the light's reach. Again, too far to make out clearly, but definitely a person. This time closer than before, maybe 30 feet from the house, just standing at the edge of the yard. No flashlight, no movement. Just there. I stood frozen for a full minute. Then I turned the porch light on. The second I did, the figure moved. Not toward me, not away, just to the left, like it was circling the house. I backed away from the window and locked the kitchen door. I turned off the lights in the house and watched, phone in hand, ready to call someone if I had to. But after a few minutes, nothing else happened. The figure never appeared again. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next few days were more of the same, but worse. Every night, between midnight and 3 a.m., the motion lights would click on. Every time I looked out, I either saw nothing or glimpsed the figure for a split second, always on the edge of visibility, always still. Once I saw them crouched behind a snowbank. Another time, I thought I saw fingers curl around the edge of my shed. But when I stepped out with a flashlight and scanned the yard, there was no sign of anyone. No tracks in the snow. Nothing. I started to feel like I was losing it. I even set up my phone in the window to record overnight, but the battery kept dying early, or the recordings came back with static and flickering frames. I called the sheriff's office and they sent a deputy out one afternoon. He looked around, found nothing unusual, and chalked it up to cabin fever. But I wasn't imagining this. I started keeping a knife on my nightstand and a flashlight under my pillow. On December 17th, it snowed heavily all day. By nightfall, the entire property was buried in fresh powder. Around 1:20 a.m., I was in bed, eyes wide open, when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Not on the window this time, on the glass door that leads to the back deck. I grabbed the flashlight and crept through the hallway, trying not to breathe too loudly. When I reached the living room, I turned off the lamp and waited. Another tap. I flicked on the flashlight and aimed it at the door. Standing on the deck, just beyond the frosted glass, was a man. He was tall, over 6 feet, and wearing a dark coat. His face was partially obscured by the reflection, but I swear to God he was smiling, just standing there. No knocking, no talking, just watching me. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. He tilted his head slowly, like a dog trying to understand something. Then, he lifted one hand and tapped again. Tap. I backed into the hallway and called 911. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. The dispatcher said a unit was already nearby and would be there in 10 minutes. I stayed crouched in the hallway, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. I never looked back toward the door. When the deputy arrived, they found footprints on the deck, leading to the stairs. Then nothing. No trail away, no prints in the snow beyond the edge of the deck. It was like the man had vanished. I stayed at a friend's place after that, and I didn't go back until January. When I did, nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry. No weird tracks. Just my empty, quiet house. But I did find something that still makes my stomach turn. On the back door glass, near the bottom corner, someone had pressed their fingers against the frost. 4 long, distinct smudges. Human fingers, as clear as day. I wiped them off and haven't spoken about that week since. Until now, I still live here. I still work from home. But I keep every curtain shut after dark. I've installed cameras, floodlights, motion sensors, everything. But none of it changes the feeling I get some nights when the wind dies down and the woods go still. Like something is waiting just beyond the edge of the trees. Not moving. Not breathing. Just watching. Because someone was outside my house last winter, and I'm not convinced they ever left. I don't usually post stuff like this, but this has stayed with me for years, and no one in my life has ever been able to explain it away. This happened to me back in 2018. I was 26 at the time, living alone in a small rental house outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I'd moved there for a job at a graphic design firm, a remote gig that gave me the freedom to work from anywhere. I chose the place because it was affordable, quiet, and right on the edge of the woods. I thought it would help me focus. I didn't realize that quiet can sometimes be oppressive. My house was at the end of a dead-end road, the kind of place where you might see one car drive by a day, and it was probably your neighbor. My nearest neighbor was about a quarter mile up the road, an old man named Hank who mostly kept to himself. Beyond my backyard was just dense forest, miles of it. At first, it was peaceful. I'd sit on the back porch in the morning with my coffee and watch deer wander through the trees. The nights were silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves or hoot of an owl. It felt like I had the whole world to myself, but that changed about 3 weeks after I moved in. It started subtly. One night, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed movement outside the bathroom window. It was just a quick flicker, like someone had walked by fast, but it was enough to make me freeze. I turned off the water and leaned closer to the window, My porch light was on, casting a soft yellow glow over the side yard. Nothing. No one. I shook it off as my imagination. Maybe a raccoon, maybe my own reflection playing tricks on me. But the next night, I heard something else. It was around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard what I thought was gravel crunching in the driveway. I sat up and listened. A few seconds later, there it was again. Crunch, crunch. It was slow, deliberate, like someone walking but trying not to be heard. I live alone, no roommates, no pets, and no reason for anyone to be outside at 2 in the morning. I got up, pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. My porch light had switched off on its timer, so everything outside was cloaked in shadows. But I swear I saw something near the edge of the trees. A figure. It was just standing there, not moving, just facing the house. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, it was gone. I stayed up the rest of the night with a baseball bat next to me. Didn't sleep a second. As soon as the sun came up, I walked around the property. There were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest someone had actually been there. I told myself it must have been a dream, or maybe I'd been so tired that I imagined the whole thing. But things got weirder. Over the next few days, I started getting this overwhelming feeling like I was being watched. Not just outside, but in my own house. Like when I'd be working at my computer in the living room, I'd get this sharp sensation that someone was right behind me. I'd turn around, and of course no one was there. One night, I was up late designing a flyer for a client. It was around 1:30 a.m. I was in the zone, wearing headphones, music low, when I felt it again, that prickling awareness. I paused the music, sat still. Then I heard it, tap, a soft tap against the window behind me. I live in a 1-story house. That window looks out over the backyard. There's no porch, no deck, just grass and then woods. Tap, tap. I slowly turned, hard hammering, and pulled back the curtain. No one. I opened the window, stuck my head out into the cold night air. Silence. Trees. Nothing else. I didn't sleep in my bedroom that night. I curled up on the couch with all the lights on and that damn baseball bat in my lap. A few days later, I decided to install motion sensor lights in the backyard. I figured if there really was someone creeping around, at least the lights would scare them off, or give me a heads up. That night, around 3 a.m., the motion light outside my bedroom flicked on. I was awake, couldn't sleep, and the sudden burst of light made my stomach drop. I waited, barely breathing, straining to hear anything over the sound of my pulse. Then I heard it, a dragging sound, like something being pulled across the grass. I forced myself to peek out the window. That's when I saw the shape. It was crouched low. I couldn't make out any details, just a silhouette hunched over like it was crawling. Slowly, toward the house. I ducked down instinctively, grabbed my phone and called the police. I whispered everything, barely able to keep my voice steady. By the time they arrived, the backyard was empty. No sign of anyone, no prints, no damage, just a backyard bathed in harsh floodlight and my own racing thoughts. The officer told me it was probably a wild animal, maybe a bear. I wanted to believe him, but bears don't crawl like that, and they don't tap on windows. I was losing sleep, constantly on edge, jumping at every sound. I kept all the blinds closed during the day, and I stopped going outside unless it was absolutely necessary. Then came the night that confirmed it wasn't just paranoia. It was a Friday. I had decided to treat myself to some takeout, drove into town, and came back around 9 p.m. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. My porch light, set to a timer, was off. I could have sworn I'd left it on. When I stepped onto the porch, I noticed the door was cracked open, only about an inch, but still, I froze. I always lock my door when I leave. Always. I backed off the porch and called the cops again. They did a full sweep of the house, no one inside, nothing stolen, no sign of forced entry. But when they checked the back door, they found something that chilled me. Scratches. Long, deep scratches around the handle, like someone had tried to claw their way in. They couldn't explain it. No signs of tools or prying, just gouges in the wood like from fingernails, or something worse. They recommended I get security cameras, so I did. Spent way too much money on a set of outdoor cams with night vision. Installed them the next day. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Then I checked the footage from Saturday night. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the backyard camera picked up movement. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. It was tall, thin, almost impossibly lanky. It moved with this jerky, unnatural gait, like its joints didn't bend the way they should. It walked slowly toward the back window, the same one I'd heard tapping on. Then it stopped, and just stood there, staring at the glass. I watched for a full 2 minutes as this thing just stood there, completely motionless. Then it turned its head, not toward the camera, but like it sensed it, and smiled. I don't know how to describe it. The smile was too wide, too many teeth. The shape of the mouth didn't match the proportions of its face. Then it turned and slinked back into the trees. I called the cops again, showed them the footage. They took it seriously this time. They sent someone out to patrol the area for the next few nights. Told me to keep my doors locked and lights on. But they never found anything, and I never saw that figure again. But that's not the end. A week later, I was talking to Hank, my neighbor. He'd noticed the patrol cars and asked if everything was okay. I didn't go into detail, just said someone had been snooping around. He got quiet, then said something I still think about. "You know," he said, "this place used to be Cherokee land. Way back. My granddad used to tell me stories when I was a boy, about something in the woods. A watcher, he called it. Said it wasn't human. Said it stood at the edge of the trees and watched the people who didn't belong. Sometimes it came closer." I laughed it off, but not really, because deep down I think he was telling the truth. I moved out a month later, broke my lease, took the financial hit. I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep through the night again without feeling like eyes were boring into the back of my head. It's been years since then, but sometimes when I visit friends who live near the woods, I get that feeling again, like something is watching me, and I find myself checking the windows just to make sure no one's outside. I don't tell many people this story anymore, mostly because when I do, they look at me like I'm either lying or just trying to scare them. Maybe that's fair. If I hadn't lived it myself, I'd probably assume the same. But every now and then, usually when I'm alone at night, I'll think about it again. And when I do, I still get that same crawling feeling under my skin. This happened about 5 years ago when I moved into a small rental house just outside of town. I'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship and didn't want to be around people. I needed space, quiet. The kind of quiet you can only get when you're a little too far from everything. So I found this small house through a friend of a friend. It was old, kind of run down, but it was cheap and secluded. Just a little 2-bedroom place nestled between some trees, with a long gravel driveway and only one neighbor, maybe a 1/4 mile down the road. I worked remotely, so I didn't have much reason to go into town. I'd make a weekly grocery run, and that was about it. The first few weeks were peaceful, exactly what I needed. I spent my time working, reading, cooking, and just trying to get my head right again. The only odd thing, even back then, was the backyard. It was fenced off, but not like a normal backyard fence. This one was tall, at least 8 feet, and solid wood, with no gaps. Whoever built it clearly didn't want anyone seeing in or out. And the weird part was, there was no gate. None. Just a solid perimeter wall surrounding the backyard like some kind of box. The previous tenant had warned me not to mess with it, said the owner was weird about it, and made it clear that nobody was supposed to go back there. So I didn't. At first, it wasn't hard. The backyard didn't interest me, and with no way in, it was easy to forget it even existed. But as the days went on, I started to wonder more and more what was behind that fence. The first odd thing happened around the 3rd week. I was up late working on a project, probably around 1 o'clock a.m. when I heard a soft tapping sound. I paused my music, listened. Nothing. I figured it was just an animal or maybe a branch against the siding. I tried to go back to work, but there it was again. Tap, tap, tap. This time I muted everything and walked to the back of the house, where the sound seemed to be coming from. I looked out the rear window, but all I could see was the fence. No movement, no shadows, nothing. The backyard light was one of those automatic motion ones, and it didn't turn on. I waited there for maybe a minute before the sound stopped. Eventually, I chalked it up to wildlife and went to bed. A few nights later, it happened again. Only this time, it wasn't just tapping. I was lying in bed around midnight, drifting off when I heard it. A creaking sound like wood flexing. It was subtle, almost like the sound of someone slowly stepping on an old porch. I froze and held my breath. Again, silence, but then something new. A whisper. I couldn't make out what it said, or even what direction it came from, but I know what I heard. A human voice. Soft, just a breath louder than the wind. I got up and went room to room, checking every door and window. All locked. Nothing outside. The backyard light didn't come on, and the motion detector by the front steps stayed off. Still, I barely slept that night. The next day, I installed security cameras, just cheap ones, 2 for the front yard and 1 facing the back fence. I wasn't expecting to catch anything. Honestly, I just needed the peace of mind. About a week went by without incident. I checked the cameras each morning. Nothing unusual, just a few squirrels and a raccoon that seemed to like pacing along the fence line in the back. But on the 8th night, something changed. Around 2:15 a.m., I was woken up by a loud noise, like something heavy had hit the side of the house. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. Again, nothing. No movement. No light. But this time, the feeling was different. It wasn't just fear or confusion. It was dread. A pit in my stomach that told me something was very wrong. I pulled up the live camera feed on my phone. The front yard was clear, but the back camera, static, just a dead black screen with a flickering white line through the middle. I refreshed the feed, same thing. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the back door. I didn't open it, just listened. For a long time, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, just barely over the wind, footsteps, but not walking, pacing, slow, steady steps. Back and forth, like someone was waiting. I stood there frozen until the sound stopped, and then nothing, just silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I went outside to check the camera. The power cord had been yanked out of the outlet and sliced clean down the middle. Not chewed, not frayed, sliced. I decided I'd had enough and called the owner of the house to ask if there had ever been issues with break-ins. He was cagey at first, but when I mentioned the backyard, he got quiet. I asked about the fence, why it was so high, why there was no gate. He sighed and said, "It's just better that way, trust me." I pressed him. He finally admitted that the last few tenants had reported weird activity around the backyard. Sounds, shadows, even voices, but no one had ever been hurt. He blamed it on isolation, said people's minds start to play tricks when they're alone too long. I almost moved out right then, but something kept me there. Call it stubbornness or curiosity, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. That night I stayed up, watching the backyard. I turned off all the lights, sat by the window with my phone camera ready. Hours passed with nothing. Then, around 3 a.m., the motion light clicked on. I leaned closer to the glass and squinted into the yard. At first, I didn't see anything. But then I noticed a shape, just a sliver of something, visible between 2 fence boards where the wood had warped slightly. It was tall, too tall to be a person, and completely still. I aimed my phone camera, zoomed in. The shape didn't move. But the moment I snapped a picture, the light turned off. Instant darkness, I blinked, tried to adjust to the black, and that's when I heard it, scratching. Not against the house, against the window, just inches from my face. I dropped the phone and fell backward. When I scrambled up and turned on the lights, there was nothing there. But the outside of the glass had a long, vertical smear across it, like a single finger had been dragged down the pane. I checked the photo on my phone. It was blurry, too dark to make anything out clearly. But there was something, a figure. Vaguely human, but distorted. The proportions were off, the head too narrow, the arms too long. I deleted it. From that point on, things got worse. Some nights, I'd wake up to the sound of gravel crunching, like someone walking up and down the driveway. Other times, I'd hear whispering through the vents, so soft it almost blended with the wind. Twice, I found footprints in the mud behind the house. Long, barefoot prints. And both times, the fence had fresh scratch marks, like someone had been trying to claw their way through from the inside. And then one night, I made the mistake of trying to open the backyard. It was maybe 11:30 p.m. I was tired, emotionally drained, and I guess I just snapped. I took a crowbar and went to the corner of the house where the fence met the siding. I started prying the boards, one by one. The wood was old, and with some effort, I managed to loosen one. Behind it was darkness, just pitch black. I shined my flashlight through the gap, expecting to see trees or overgrown grass or something. But the beam just vanished, like the light had been swallowed. I leaned closer, trying to see better, and then something moved. I didn't see it clearly, just a flicker of motion, a shift in the shadows, and then a sound, not a growl, not a scream, a breath, right up against the gap. I dropped the crowbar and ran. I nailed the boards back in place, reinforced them with screws, and didn't sleep for 2 days. Eventually, I contacted the owner again and told him I was moving out. He didn't argue, just told me to leave the keys under the mat and to stay out of the backyard. I left the next day. It's been 5 years since I lived there. I've tried to forget it, to move on, to convince myself that maybe I was just losing it, that the isolation got to me, that it was all in my head. But then, last month, I got a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was quiet, raspy, but familiar. It whispered just 2 words. "I'm outside," and then the line went dead. I haven't slept since. I live in a small town in northern Michigan, one of those places that feels like it got left behind by time. There's a single gas station, a post office that closes at 4, and neighbors who wave but mostly keep to themselves. It's the kind of quiet that people from cities dream about. At least, that's what I used to think. This story happened in October of last year, and I've only told it to a few close friends. It sounds unbelievable, but every detail is true. I didn't believe in the supernatural before this, or really in anything that couldn't be explained with logic. Now, I'm not so sure. Something was outside my house that night, and it wasn't human. It started like any normal evening. I had just gotten home from work, grabbed a frozen pizza from the freezer, and queued up a dumb comedy movie to play in the background while I answered emails. The air had that crispness to it, right before the first snow. I remember I cracked a window just an inch, enough to smell the leaves and the cold. My house is a 1-story ranch on a wooded acre, about half a mile from the nearest neighbor. I like the privacy. At least, I used to. Around 8 p.m., while I was halfway through my pizza, I heard what I thought was a knock at the front door. Not loud, just a soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I paused the movie, listening. It came again. Tap, tap, tap. It was strange, mostly because no one ever comes to my house unannounced. UPS drivers don't knock, and my friends all text before they show up. Still, I figured maybe someone was lost or had car trouble. I got up and peeked out the living room window. No car, no person, just my empty gravel driveway and the trees swaying in the wind. A little unnerved, I turned on the porch light and opened the front door. Nothing. Not even footprints on the porch. I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe a branch had hit the siding or something and closed the door. 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't a knock. It was a scrape. A long, drawn-out scratching sound that seemed to come from the back of the house, like something was dragging its fingers or claws across the exterior siding. I froze. My first thought was raccoon, maybe even a bear, though that would be unusual. I turned off the living room light and slowly crept toward the kitchen, where there's a window that overlooks the backyard. I kept the lights off so I wouldn't get any glare, pressed my face to the glass. The motion light in the backyard hadn't come on. But I swear I saw something move near the tree line. Just a flicker, a shape. But when I stared harder, it was gone. I told myself it was an animal, nothing more. Still, I locked the back door and pulled the curtains shut. I tried to go back to my movie, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I turned up the volume just to drown out the silence. But silence has a way of leaking in around the edges, doesn't it? It wasn't long before I heard something else, this time from the side of the house. 3 sharp knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. I stood up, hard hammering, and made my way to the hallway that leads to the bedrooms. The sound was coming from the wall just outside my bedroom window. I didn't want to look. Something in me, the animal part of my brain, was screaming not to look. But curiosity always wins, doesn't it? I moved the curtain just a tiny bit. There was a face, right there, inches from the glass, but it wasn't a face like yours or mine. It was pale, too pale, skin stretched too tightly over sharp cheekbones, eyes that didn't reflect light, like a dog's or a deer's. Just 2 black orbs that stared directly into me. I stumbled back, lost my footing, hit the floor. When I scrambled up to look again, it was gone. I didn't call the police. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Or maybe I wasn't ready to admit that something real was happening. Instead, I turned off every light in the house, locked all the doors and windows, and sat in the dark with my phone clutched like a lifeline. It didn't stop. Over the next 2 hours, I heard it circling the house. Slow footsteps on the deck, whispers just beyond the glass. Every so often it would tap. Always 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I thought about running to the car, but that would mean going outside, and whatever was out there, it wanted me to do just that. At one point around midnight, I heard my name, soft, drawn out. Sarah. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told you my name, but yeah, my name's Sarah. And I swear to you, I recognized the voice. It sounded like my dad's. But my dad died 3 years ago. I stayed frozen on the floor for what felt like an eternity. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just listened as it made its way from one side of the house to the other, calling my name in voices that didn't belong to the living. Sarah opened the door. Sometimes it was my dad, sometimes my mom. Once it sounded like my own voice, but wrong, distorted, like it had been recorded and played back through an old cassette player. At some point, I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember was waking up in the hallway around 3 a.m., freezing and disoriented. The silence was back. Not peaceful silence, heavy, oppressive quiet. I crawled to the nearest window and peeked through the curtain. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the trees. The first light of dawn on the horizon. I waited until the sun was fully up before daring to open the front door. There were footprints, dozens of them. Bare, human-shaped footprints in the frost that had gathered overnight. They circled the house again and again. Some of them led off into the woods, but they didn't come back. I followed them to the edge of the trees, but I didn't go further. A few days later, I installed security cameras all around the house. I wanted proof. I wanted to catch it if it came back, but it didn't. Not for a long time. I reviewed the footage from that night obsessively, hoping I'd find something to confirm what I saw, what I heard. But the strangest thing was, the cameras never picked up a single sound. Not the knocks, not the footsteps, not even my own movements. Just silence. It was like the whole night had been erased. Months passed. I convinced myself it had been a dream or a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. Until last week, I was doing laundry. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was about 9 p.m., and I was standing in the laundry room folding towels when I heard the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway. I turned off the dryer and stood perfectly still. The sound came again. Footsteps. I peeked through the blinds. There was someone standing at the edge of the driveway, just standing, not moving. I couldn't see their face, but I knew. Somehow I knew it was the same thing. It had come back. I watched it for 20 minutes. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. And then slowly, it lifted one arm and waved. I shut the blinds and backed away. It was gone again by the time I looked. No footprints this time. No signs it had ever been there. But now, every night around 9, I hear those footsteps again. Always stopping right outside the window. Always waiting. I don't go outside after dark anymore. I keep all the lights off. I pretend I'm not home. I pretend I don't hear it whispering my name. But it knows I'm here. And the worst part is, sometimes it sounds like someone I love. Like my dad. Like my sister. Like the part of me that still wants to open the door.